everybody, my name is Minso. I'm a student at the Mac.Robertson Girls High School and the event organiser for the TEDx broadcast that you're going to be watching today. So before we hand over to our wonderful host Megana, I just wanted to give some thanks to the people who made this entire thing possible. So in particular, Jerry from MacRob, as well as Miss Pride and Chris, whose hard work and commitment made this entire thing possible. And I'd also like to thank the student committee members, namely Venetia, Sanaya, Nisha, Sihani, Patricia, and also June, who couldn't continue to be with us, unfortunately. So originally, when this event went from an actual live event to a virtual one, it was admittedly a little bit disappointing. However, it's really come to be a new opportunity and just a new way to experience ideas worth sharing. I hope you're as excited as I am.
Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theatres, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Mac.Robertson Girls High School's very first TEDx event. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land, the Boonwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Nagano Janolagata, and I will be your host for today's online premiere. The theme for our TEDx event is Choose Your Story, and today we will be hearing the stories of a wide array of speakers, from teachers to a surgeon and even a CEO. We will be taking part in a global conversation on topics ranging from sexual health to climate change. But first, we have a performance from one of MacRob's very own music captains, Devshi Janakantha. Devshi began singing by performing on a Sri Lankan radio station as a child. She has been a member of the Australian Youth Choir for almost 5 years, performing at a multitude of events and gigs. Now in her final year of school, Devshi sings as part of the choir at the Mac.Robertson Girls High School, and she hopes to pursue her passion after she graduates. Welcome, Devshi. She will be singing Andante Andante by ABBA.
There's a shimmer in your eyes, like the feeling of 1,000 butterflies. Please don't talk, go on, play. Andante, andante, and let me float away. I'm your music, I'm your song. Play me time and time again and make me strong. Make me sing, make me sound. Andante, andante, tread lightly on my ground. Andante, andante, oh please don't let me down. Andante, andante, oh please don't let me down.
Thank you, Devshi, for that beautiful rendition. Our first speaker is someone who has not only shaped his own story, but the stories of all of those around him. As a refugee who fled Burma to come to Australia, Bwe Thay is one of Australia's most passionate advocates for multiculturalism, and quite possibly the epitome of shaping one's story. Now one of 12 of Victoria's multicultural commissioners, he has received a range of awards for his contributions, including the VMC's 2018 Emerging Leadership in Multiculturalism Award. Welcome, Bwe Thay.
Minglaba, Salam, Habari, Chibai, Sawadikap, Namaste. Greeting to all viewers. My name is Bwe Thay. I'm a passionate advocate for human rights and multiculturalism. I wear many hats. I'm currently a commissioner at the Victorian Multicultural Commission, the Migrant Programs Coordinator at Swinburne University of Technology, the Vice President of the Communities Council on Ethnic Issues, Multicultural Ambassador for the Mental Health Foundation of Australia. In addition to this, I am part of many grassroots community organizations. Before proceeding further, I would like to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians upon the lands where I'm joining this conversation from, and I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I would also like to thank MacRob for the kind invitation for me to present on the theme, Shape Your Story. I sincerely hope that by the end of my presentation, you will get to know more about me and understand what shaped my story. I had a very simple upbringing, nothing extraordinary. We did not have much, but I have happy memories of my childhood. I was content with life. Of course, life was not the easiest, growing up in a country ruled by dictators, crippled by greed, corruption, and mismanagement. This environment in my country of birth led me to becoming a displaced person, stateless. Despite all that have happened, I don't see myself as a victim, but as a survivor, and this is one of the sentiments that I embed within my advocacy work. Refugees are not victims, they are survivors. If given the opportunity, they participate and contribute to society. If we look at the new and emerging communities across Victoria, we can see numerous examples of former refugees making valuable contribution to our society in Victoria. Looking at the attributes which assist someone to survive the experience of being a refugee, there are many parallels with the attributes required to succeed in almost any field. During my time in a refugee camp, I had the opportunity to work with many passionate educators to establish an educational college within the camp, the Leadership and Management Training College. It was our dream to give the young people the foundation they would need when eventually being resettled or returned to homeland safely. Many of the alumni have become heavily involved in community development work. Those who have been fortunate to resettle have gone on to have amazing careers in a variety of sectors and countries. This demonstration of the power of education has played a big part in my career direction. After being resettled in Australia, I pursued my own education and have spent a number of years working in roles which promote the life-changing benefit of education to migrant communities, broadening their horizon and helping them to amplify the contribution they make to Australia. Giving people a wide range of options to shape their own story and to be part of a vibrant multicultural Australia. If there is one thing that has inspired me and kept me going in some very difficult times, it is hope. A belief that there is something I, as an individual, and collectively with like-minded people, can do to make a difference. A belief that something marvelous can come from adversity and overall optimism. I always had a strong urge that if given a second chance in life, I would do everything in my capacity to be of service to the community and make contribution in any way I am able. This goes a long way to explaining my advocacy work and many of the cause I am committed to. I see life as a journey. There are good times and difficult times. Times I often just want to wake up from, or times I felt like giving up. But as a dreamer, I never gave up. Reflecting back, I can only humbly say things happened for a reason. Every struggle gave me a purpose and a reason to live. Due to the struggles in my early life, I used to dream of a life where I could achieve my full potential, something we might consider normal in Australia, something my own children now take for granted. Till today, I still call myself a dreamer. Even though I could not choose or control the aspect of my life in the past, I never gave up dreaming. The struggles in life has given me strong conviction not to take anything for granted. A good friend of mine once told me, "Bwe, never shy away from hard work. There is always a reward at the end." As vague as it sounds, as a young man, this phrase has always stayed with me. This was also where I drew my principles and outlook in life. In everything I do, I always ask myself one question: is it the right reason or is it the smart reason? And whatever the task in front of me fits into these two categories, I would then embrace the task or the situation and give it my best. My approach to life is simple. Everything I do, I try and apply my three principles, which are compassion, commitment, and consistency. Often those around me have heard me say many times, life is not perfect, but we can improve it. I feel blessed that with every obstacle and challenge in my path, I have been able to develop a strong resilience and see opportunities to find a solution so that those in similar situation like myself can have a fair go. My journey to Australia is not extraordinary. Many with the lived experience share very similar story to mine. As a refugee migrant, I came to Australia in 2009 through the resettlement program. I had to rebuild my life after spending nearly 6 years in a refugee camp. I had to reskill myself. I had to learn everything and embrace the moment and give it my all. Often, people ask me why I'm always smiling. My answer is simple. Life is a bonus. Every day is a bonus, and life is what you make of it. Today, I present before you as a proud Australian with Burmese heritage, even though the struggles in my life and those I advocate for continue. I will not shy away from the opportunity to advocate for those on the margin, the minorities, or whatever people label them, because I was once in their position. Stressful events like COVID-19 pandemic can often bring out feeling of insecurity, which can manifest, for example, in increased racism. The COVID-19 virus does not distinguish between different ethnic groups. We are literally all in this together. We have a responsibility to keep each other safe. I believe there is only one race, and that is the human race. If we don't take the initiative to learn about those around us, we will see them as the other. Hence, like every relationship, we have to commit, try to find a balance so that the relationship is meaningful and productive. I'm a passionate advocate for the empowerment of refugees and migrants through education. Education leads to employment, which in turn empower these communities. My message to all is that we should be inspired by those around us and inspire others. When other members of the new and emerging communities see success, they aspire to the same. This generates its own momentum. A critical part of this, to me, is developing the next generation of community leaders and advocates, be this through formal development programs or individual mentoring. Personally, I mentor a number of up-and-coming youth leaders, as this is the future of their communities. Seeing the up-and-coming generation shine gives me confidence in the future. Little things make big things. Everything we do have an impact, maybe big or small. Every effort in the right direction helps the cause. Never believe the action you take in your own lives are in isolation. In my own journey, I started working at the grassroots level in Australia, helping people around me. This led to me becoming more involved in the bigger picture, and now I have the privilege of being able to advocate at statewide and even at the national level, supporting more people than I could have ever imagined. We all have the opportunity to shape our stories and the stories we pass to the future generation, writing letters about things which concern us, getting involved with organization of people with viewed allies to our own, all add to your personal story and our collective story. To conclude, I am excited by the possibility which lies before us. In some sense, I have the enthusiasm of a teenager. My life here in Australia has just begun. I am blessed, and I acknowledge and give credit to all the wonderful people I have met along my life's journey, who have touched, inspired, and motivated me. I thank you for shaping my story and enriching my life. If my legacies were to be remembered as a passionate advocate for humanity, I would be satisfied. Thank you all. I look forward to your questions after this presentation.
Thank you, Bwe, for sharing your truly inspirational story. Our next speaker is someone you may have seen or learned from at MacRob. Where do education, criminology, and fairy tales intersect? Stephanie Rowlston would know. She graduated from Monash University with a Bachelor of Arts and an honours degree in secondary education, and she now teaches legal studies, literature and English language as a teacher at the Mac.Robertson Girls High School. Stephanie focuses on challenging students' understanding of what these subjects look like in the classroom. Described by our Macrobians as a caring and energetic teacher, Stephanie inspires her students to be themselves through her unapologetic authenticity. Stephanie creates environments where students are excited to learn and are empowered to connect their learning to the real world. Welcome, Stephanie, or Miss Rowlston.
If you were given the opportunity to ask a question, any question, and you knew that it would be answered, what would you ask? What's the question you've always wanted to know the answer to, but just haven't had the time or the opportunity to ask anyone yet? Even better, what's the question that keeps you up late at night? The question that you know a search engine won't be able to answer because your question is fundamentally ungoogleable and requires a human's response. Perhaps it's a question you feel ashamed to ask. Something you feel like you should already know. And because no one else around you is asking this question, you yourself will never ask it, for fear that if you do, the people around you will realize just how little you know about the world. As a teacher, I get asked lots of questions. But after attending a professional development session in my first year of teaching, I started to worry about the questions my students weren't asking me. In a session unpacking the minds of 14-year-olds, I was sitting with a group of friends and we started talking about all of the things that we wanted to know at 14 that we never asked anyone. Or more accurately, things that we'd never asked anyone who was responsible enough to give us a decent answer. The presenter highlighted the fact that in the age of TikToks, Insta stories, and unfiltered content on the internet, most young people turn to Google and other search engines to ask the types of questions they feel like they couldn't or shouldn't ask anyone else. The kinds of questions that are too awkward to ask a parent. Questions that might reveal a gaping hole in their knowledge, inviting ridicule from friends or stern looks from teachers. But there are some questions that can't be answered by a search engine, and there are some questions that, once they're asked, need to be followed up in ways that a search engine simply can't. Walking out of that session, the presenter's slide of real questions asked by real teenagers was the only thing on my mind. So many questions about sex and drugs and alcohol and relationships. In that moment, I was terrified. I was 22, finally living my dream of teaching, and the realization that my students could walk silently out of my classes with questions that desperately needed to be answered challenged me on every level. I felt completely unprepared to answer their questions, but I knew I had to do something. The next day, after some significant mental preparation, I gave 25 Year 10 students a sticky note and the opportunity to ask a question. As I passed each student a sticky note, I said, "This is the time for you to ask a question that you would like an answer to. It might be a question about something we're studying in class, or about school, or it might be a question about life, the universe, or anything in it." The first time I said this to my students, they looked at me with wide, curious eyes. "Any question?" they probed. "You'll answer any question?" And I could see the cogs start to whir in their minds. What kind of question wouldn't Ms. Rowlston answer? What will happen if I ask that question? Oh, she's looking at me. What question should I write on the small yellow sticky note in front of me? As the students began to ponder which question they would ask, I added, "And every question asked by the people in this class will get a response that will be shared with the people in this class. If I don't know the answer to your question, I'll find someone who does and share their thoughts with you." Then, with a smile, I finished, "And every question you ask will get a response. There's no limit to the kinds of questions you can ask, but if you ask a question that's too personal, the response you get might be, 'Ms. Rowlston's not answering that.'" The questions I got back from my students astounded me. Some of them wanted to know more about me, my hobbies, my favorite book, and whether I make my own clothes. The answers to these questions were easy. I like to crochet. My favorite book changes, but at the moment it's Circe by Madeline Miller. And yes, I even made this dress. Then I got questions that were more difficult. How do you do your tax? When is a good time to start investing? How do you live a good life? These were not the questions about sex and drugs that I had mentally prepared for. They were even harder. How, as a 22-year-old, was I even going to begin? I mean, I use an accountant for my tax. I personally don't own any shares, and in regards to figuring out what a good life is, I'm still working on it. So I turned, as most young people do, to our friend Google. With a quick Google search, I found the website for the Australian Taxation Office and a beginner's guide to starting investing. That left living a good life. To answer that question, I turned to the brilliant people I work with, who freely gave up their time to share their insights into life, the universe, and what it means to be a good human. I shared the answers I found in a virtual classroom with my students, and as the year progressed, I began doing sticky note questions with all of my classes. The virtual classrooms we created together became a record of the things that we were discussing and the events that were shaping my students' lives. At the end of the year, I asked all of my students in all of my classes, what's the most important thing you learned this year? Every student said the thing that they had learned that was most important, the thing that they would carry forward into next year and the rest of their lives, were the answers to our sticky note questions. Fast forward to 2020, and each week I am handed hundreds of questions on sticky notes. I'd like to say that in my 3 years of teaching, I've become significantly wiser and can now answer all of these questions by myself, but that would be a lie. I'd estimate that I, along with my trusty assistant Google, answer about 70% of the questions students ask. To answer the rest, I rely on a wonderful team of educators who openly are happy to share their lives, experiences, successes, and failures with my students. Online learning posed a unique challenge to the way I do sticky note questions. Unlike 2019, when I invited different teachers into my classes to answer student questions live, 2020 has seen the introduction of an adulting podcast, where each week students submit questions via a Google Doc and I randomly select 3 for a guest to answer. At the end of the week, I share the audio with my classes for them to listen to and ponder over the weekend. So, after answering all of these questions, what have I learned? Well, first of all, students are way more concerned with taxation than I thought. The first round of sticky note questions with a new class will inevitably bring me at least 5 variations of the question, how do I do my taxes? I've learned that most of the questions young people ask don't have one answer. But if students are part of an environment where they are empowered to ask difficult questions, they will inevitably become part of the research team that offers new, unique, challenging, and multiplicitous answers. I've also learned just how many young people are concerned with their futures. How many young people are worried about disappointing the important figures in their lives? And how many young people are grappling with the concept of what it means to be a decent, functional, and responsible human? Humans who are kind, caring, and considerate. Humans who have clear goals and strategies for success, but who also recognize failure as an opportunity for growth. Humans who advocate for change and make the world a better place through their actions, and perhaps most importantly of all, humans who aren't afraid to ask the awkward, difficult, complex, and challenging questions that young people are all too often so hesitant to ask. I couldn't finish this without sharing some of the questions that I was asked this week. So here they are. What is one small thing you can do every day to make yourself happy? Sometimes with all the constant news and media updates going on, it can become a little overwhelming. What is your #1 tip for keeping things in perspective? How do you feel about suspenders? If you have the opportunity, or you have the power to create the opportunity to ask a young person what questions they have, do it. There are few things as powerful as finding out exactly what issues a young person is grappling with and then being part of the research team that helps provide them with answers. It takes time to create an environment where young people feel comfortable enough to ask these kinds of questions. It's tough, and it requires an investment from teachers, from adults, and from the students themselves. And I can't promise that if you try out sticky note questions, that you won't get questions about sex or drugs or alcohol or relationships. I can, however, promise that you will get difficult questions. Questions that are awkward, uncomfortable, and hard to answer. But aren't those the kinds of questions that need to be answered the most?
Thanks, Ms. Rowlston, for your insight on the questions we've always wanted answered but have never asked. Our third speaker for today is tired of textbooks ignoring the essentials of sexual health. This game changer is redefining research into female sexuality. Professor Helen O'Connell became the first female urological surgeon in Australia, shaping her story, and she asks us, how will you choose and shape yours? Welcome, Professor Helen O'Connell.
There's an old joke. What's the difference between the clitoris and a pub? Every man knows how to find a pub. But is it men's fault, this ignorance about an important organ to women? Today we'll look at the basis for that ignorance, research that's changing the way we think, and also the exciting news that men and women alike are getting cliterate. When I was studying to be a surgeon, the textbook we used had a lot to say about the penis. The male urogenital triangle took up 4 pages. And then the female urogenital triangle started off like this. All the male formations and structures are present in the female, but modified greatly for functional reasons. Modifications? We're not modifications. I would try to educate the author of last. Some of the quotes from the book that got me going. The essential difference is the failure in the female of midline fusion of genital folds, lacking the rigid support of the complete perineal membrane of the male, and there are a few poorly developed pit-like glands said to be homologous with the prostate. More to the point, the clitoris, which as a young woman I was very aware of from the inside, was actually almost completely omitted from the book. There was a book written about the clitoris in 1866 by a British gynecologist, Dr. Isaac Baker Brown. His book is entitled On the Curability of Certain Forms of Insanity, Epilepsy, Catalepsy, and Hysteria in Females. What was the cure for this range of ailments? Surgical removal of the clitoris. But it wasn't just in the UK that this operation was offered for this range of problems. It was in other parts of the Western world as well. Elizabeth Sheen, a medical anthropologist, put it this way: the clitoris was so unimportant to a normal woman so as not to be missed if removed, and yet lurking in its substance was the greatest threat to female welfare ever known. Intellectual and surgical removal of the clitoris is part of our cultural inheritance. In preparation for our final surgical exams as young urologists in 1993, I had the benefit of a tutorial from Professor John Hudson, a renowned paediatric surgeon, who was talking to us about intersex surgery. It was clear listening to him that he really cared about preservation of the dorsal clitoral nerve and vessels at the time of this surgery. I found this a real breakthrough, and it gave me great hope. I did ask him about becoming my supervisor for a proposed doctorate, and he was a great supervisor. Around that time in urology, and even today, there's been a lot of focus in surgery, in prostate removal surgery, on not harming the nerves to the penile erectile mechanism. I did a literature search at that time to see if there'd been similar work done in females, couldn't find anything. And so we started a research program mimicking the studies that have been done on male anatomy, and then following the nerves by dissection all the way from the spine forward, past the rectum, cervix, on the undersurface of the vaginal wall to the back of the clitoris. I had the benefit of access to an incredible archive of fetal material from the late Professor Douglas Stevens, a doyen of embryology. But having studied these fetal tissues and the nerve studies just increased my belief that the most important study to do was a study of the anatomy of the clitoris per se. Having finished my training then in the US, I came back and started a new research program. People ask me whether the establishment were supportive. They really provided resources and enormous expertise to this work. The Urology Society awarded me their highest fellowship. The Royal Melbourne Hospital's head of surgery gave me the assistance of an incredibly gifted dissector in his own right and photographer, Rob Plenter, and the Department of Anatomy, Professor Colin Anderson, just knew how to get a piece of tissue that I was able to obtain, and he would photograph it at exactly the right magnification in exactly the right section to tell the story of the anatomy. Science is so much related to this communication piece, and medical art complements that. We had the benefit of working with a great medical artist in Dr. Levent Effie as well. So an example of the work you can see in this dissection. So you can see the very large dorsal clitoral nerves arising at the pelvic side wall and going up underneath the pubic bone. And then the same nerves you can see in this histology section or microscopic section at the glands of the clitoris. And you can see there's very large nerve trunks in addition to the receptors for vibration and light touch. Gray's said in relation to these nerves, the female nerves, they were very small and supplied the clitoris. That was it. Anyway, that proved to be wrong. The nerves were very large at every age, even in children. And they would stay large all the way through, even to that very sensitive tip of the clitoris. I received in the mail recently this 3D model from Dr. E. Mulligan, who is definitely clitorate. This may be a helpful way to understand the anatomy. So this is life size, but this is quite small, but it gives you the idea of the clitoris tucking in under the bone as it does. These arms or crura unite as they go up under the bone and then join to form the body of the clitoris. The body takes a sort of boomerang-like path out under the bone and projecting into the mons or mound of the pubis, ending in this highly sensitive tip or glands of the clitoris. These parts are called the bulbs, and they join together at what's called the root of the clitoris, where the four organs unite. There's also another area that's called the pars intermedia, and Professor Claire Yang has done some studies specifically on this. it has conjoint blood vessels that unite all of these parts, and it's immediately under the skin, a very important anatomical area. One of the things that the lay public have coined is a concept of internal clitoris, which is pretty useful actually. So this is the only bit that can be seen from the outside, the rest of it all being hidden from view. In elderly cadavers, in young cadavers, the clitoris is a very substantial organ. It's multiplanar, and one of the changes we see with age is these bulbs tend to shrink up towards the other parts of the clitoris. It was an incredible gift from all of these donors, these selfless souls, this donation of their body. When I was working in the US, I had the privilege of working for Professor Edward Maguire, himself a pioneer of a new specialty, female urology. One day he had a chance conversation with Professor John Delancey, a guru, international guru of gynecology and pelvic anatomy. John had been researching pelvic MRI studies, and he shot me an email saying, "Ed says, you've been studying the clitoris. We think we can see the clitoris on MRI. Are you interested in collaborating?" Well, let me think about that for about a microsecond. Anyway, it was the most incredible opportunity to be able to combine the dissection studies with this very complementary live anatomy that MRI brings. Norm Eisenberg, the Professor of Anatomy at Melbourne Uni, and Professor Chris Briggs and others added to these forms of anatomy, surface anatomy, as they'd done for every other body part, in the development of their educational tool, Anatomedia. People ask me, has anatomy changed, the teaching of anatomy? And I would have to say our young doctors and other health workers at the University of Melbourne have had the opportunity to become cliterate through the provision of Anatomedia. In 2007, working with Norm Eisenberg, we created a publication for the Journal of Sexual Medicine where we aimed to bring together anatomical concepts, but for health professionals more generally, but whilst maintaining that scientific validity. There's this crazy kind of cultural concept of vagina versus clitoris, and as though is one or the other, where both organs are very important to female sexuality. This MRI helps you to understand the relationship between these two organs. So at the top, the highly vascular or intensely blood supplied organ, the clitoris, you can see its components here, the body, the bulbs, all wrapping around the upper aspect or into the mons, which is up here. And here's the urethra, which is sort of target-like on MR, and then the vaginal wall here. So the idea that they're completely separate organs is just wrong. And Grays did say there's no relationship between the clitoris and the urethra, which also proved to be incorrect. You can see again in this TV art from a documentary, Forbidden Pleasure, the relationship between these parts. Clitoris is gaining momentum. The clitoris is not, as the so-called father of anatomy, Vesalius, said in the 16th century, a new and useless part. Today we bring meaning to the word clitoris. By the power of science, we're empowering women and men alike. Yes, the brain is where orgasm occurs, but it almost always occurs in the presence of clitoral stimulation. It's not that orgasm can't occur without clitoral stimulation, it's just very unlikely. But how wonderful for people to understand these organs of pleasure much more. How great for the people who own them and for the people who love them. I'm going to show you some exciting resources that just seem to be manifesting. This is a box of clitorises that just arrived in the mail. 3D printed clitoris. It's amazing how technology is aiding in this movement. But then more old-fashioned, a little puppet showing the labia minora, the glands of the clitoris, and the internal parts of the clitoris for educational purposes. And this one, a model sent to me from some German model makers showing the pubis on the inside, the pink being the body and so forth, and the bulbs in blue. Journalist Melissa Fife won 2 awards for her work on getting clitoris in 2018. Hilary Burridge wrote the most uplifting book. Hard to believe a book called Female Mutilation could be uplifting, but she shares her vision for the steps to end female mutilation, giving us great hope. There are many resources online, documentaries and podcasts, as well as great books to help in the movement of getting clitorate. For the future of this movement, I visualise a world where every person is clitorate, where schools provide accurate resources every time, where pornography actually serves and helps female sexuality, and where the world reflects upon the history of thousands of years of trauma to girls' clitorises, but commits to healthy change and protection against that mutilation. Where sex is about mutual pleasure, not one partner pursuing and the other resisting. Celebrate getting clitorate.
Thank you, Helen, for opening our eyes on sexual health and helping us go from illiterate to clitorate. We will now have a short break to allow you all to absorb the incredible stories you have heard so far and give your eyes a break from your screens. Remember to tune it back in after 5 minutes to continue listening and learning from our sensational speakers. See you soon! to MacRob's debut TEDx event. We hope you had a nice break and a chance to reflect on the remarkable stories from our speakers so far. Our first speaker in the second part of today's event is the founder of Future Minds Network, or FMN, Nathaniel Diong. This extraordinary entrepreneur's company helps ambitious teenagers launch social businesses. They work with mentors from YC, Harvard, and Oxford by building and breaking startups whilst learning skills for the future of work. Nathaniel has worked with over 11,000 young people and mentored waves of startups across Australia, the UK, Canada, and the US. This includes UC Berkeley, 2 UN-affiliated hackathons, the Global Hack, Practora, RMIT Activator, Remarkable Accelerator, and more. He is currently an EIR at an international startup accelerator, Spark Teen, as well as at the Human Entrepreneur in the UK. He also sits on 8 non-for-profit boards ranging from education to healthcare. Welcome, Nathaniel.
I'm an educator. Never would have imagined that I would ever be one. I mean, the chances of me doing that were off even before I was born. You see, I had a 0.01% chance of even existing. I always imagined that God had this big Excel sheet in the sky and he somehow messed up the calculations. So he had one column for non-existence, one column for existence, and he put an extra number in here. And so this conversation with Earth and God, and Earth says, but why? Why another human being? And God says, it's just another 1 in 7 billion, you can keep it. And sometimes I wish this is how my bank account worked. Like, here, have 1 million, enjoy it, don't worry about it, you can keep it. But I can dream, right? And so I often looked at my life as the statistical error, an anomaly, or an outlier. But my parents saw me differently. They saw me as a miracle, and they named me Nathaniel, meaning the gift of God. But I always felt like this outlier, and I couldn't shake this feeling, because as a kid, I felt like the other kids couldn't understand or couldn't see that the world was imperfect, and that there was so much suffering in the world. They seemed to be so happy, yet I seemed to be so troubled. And it was almost like I had this secret that I'd learned too early, that the world was imperfect. And so as a kid, it's so simple to think that the world is perfect. Right? You have chocolate, you have cake, you have cookies, you can cry to get anything you want. What more could be better? And so I tried this the other day. I strategically sat down in one corner. My bank account was empty. So I cried, bawled my eyes out, opened them, closed them, and magic. No, it didn't work. I was still broke. I still had no money in my account. And so as I grew up, I started to realize that things were changing. Crying no longer stopped working. It didn't work for me. And cracks began to form in this perfect world of mine. And so I remember when I was 10, I travelled to Myanmar with my family. We were at this restaurant and we were eating a delicious meal. We, like every Asian family, ordered 5 to 6 different dishes. It was so great. Such a delicious meal, I can still remember it. And me and my brother back then, we were on a strict seafood diet. So we seafood, we eat it. So 5 to 6 dishes was nothing, and we were eating. I can remember I was eating until I started to feel sleepy. You know when you eat so much that you fall into this like food coma? That was basically us. And my stomach had expanded 4 times the regular size of a normal human being, but I kept going, I was soldiering on, I wanted to be this food, but we lost. And so I said, okay, I'll come back for you later. But we ended up not being able to finish our food on the table, and we had leftovers. Normally we would put this in takeaway, but this one time we didn't. And so we left the food on the table and we walked out of the restaurant. As we were walking out, I remember so distinctly turning behind, and to my shock, I saw all the waiters, each and every one from the restaurant, had rushed to our table, sat down and started eating our meal. And they were eating it like it was the best meal that they had ever had. And I was disgusted. At 10 years old, I didn't understand why these waiters couldn't afford to buy their own meals, why they couldn't use the money that they had just earned to buy a warm meal, not filled with somebody else's saliva. And so I was disgusted. And it wasn't until later that I realized the luxury that I had. I didn't realize that it was a luxury to come home, to have warm food on the table, to have a roof over my head, to have a warm bed to sleep on. I didn't realize all of these things. And so I began to grasp this concept of suffering as my world seemed to crumble before my eyes. I remember so distinctly that I fell into this pit of sadness. Every night I would cry myself to sleep because I didn't understand. And I was later diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety. And this followed me. This followed me so much, and it had such a big effect on me that I remember one time I came home from school and I told my parents I'm going to drop out. And so this was normal. Who doesn't want to drop out? Like a 10, 11-year-old kid coming back from primary school might say something like, Mom, I hate my homework. English, math, science, none of this is relevant to my future. Why do I have to keep studying? I'm going to drop out. But I was different. I didn't want to drop out because of that. I wanted to drop out so I could fly to Myanmar, so I could help these people, donate all of my time and donate all of my money and life savings to them. But my life savings, my $100 or $200 at the time wasn't enough, and so my sensible parents told me that. And they suggested instead, if you really care, why don't you study hard, work hard, get a good job, and make sure that you go back and donate to those people in Myanmar in a few years. But I wasn't happy with that. But with my $100 or $200 in the bank, there wasn't much I could do anyway. And so I stayed in school. This frustration within me continued to grow. And in high school, I decided I was going to make a difference. We had a lot of different clubs in high school. We had the environment club, mental health, global issues, education. And so I thought that if I joined one of these and helped out, this was my way of making a difference in the community. So I did. I applied. I got rejected. I sent out 17 different applications to every captain you can imagine. School captain, environment captain, well-being captain. And I became the captain of rejection. Yeah, so I was rejected from half of the 17 things that I applied to. More than half of them. So for the half of them that I was accepted to, I went in, I volunteered my time, and I contributed. But I still felt like it wasn't enough. There were other things that I was passionate about that I didn't see within my school environment. And so when the door slammed into my face with rejection, I walked out of those doors and I created new ones. I saw the gaps in my environment and I created my own opportunities. I created 3 different clubs, one in entrepreneurship, one in Model UN, and one in social change. And at the time I didn't know much about any of these, but I knew that each of these had a huge potential to make an impact. So that's why I was so interested in each and every one of them. And so I created these, and this social change club, we named it Future Minds. We decided to run a conference for Future Minds. And the topic was how to make a difference in the world as a young person. You see, this statement had plagued me for so long. I still hadn't cracked it yet. From primary school as a 10-year-old to high school, I still felt like I couldn't make a difference in the world because I didn't know how. I felt helpless to shape my own story, to go out and support another person and help them shape theirs. I felt powerless in our society, which tells us that young people are the next leaders of tomorrow. But rarely gives us the opportunity to actually realize our own potential. And so we did this conference, and this conference turned into a 2-month hackathon. It was a hackathon where we created solutions to the problems that we saw in the world. We had ideas from a riverside cleanup that tackled clean water and sanitation in local communities, all the way to an idea that recycled old, ugly fruit into skincare and cosmetics. And this hackathon turned into a pitch night where we pitched our solutions to the CEO of World Vision Australia. And this all came from me taking a chance. It came from me taking a chance, not knowing anything about these fields, but being willing to jump into them anyway. I had faith that surely I wasn't the only one who felt this way, and I was right. We gathered 100 students in 5 different high schools, and we ran that event. And since then I've been able to work with 11,000 young people who've turned into future founders, innovators, investors, and change makers. And we've used entrepreneurship as this medium to create the change that we want to see in the world. But not only that, we get to learn key skills for the future of work, like communication and pitching, and financial literacy and business modeling. And we get to create our own jobs for the future in an economy which is uncertain. Entrepreneurship became such a powerful medium for this. And now outside of this, I mentor early stage startups in different corners of the world. I'm really lucky to be able to help these founders grow and scale their startups. One of the most interesting things I found actually in entrepreneurship is that it has a lot to do with taking chances. So when you talk to a venture capitalist, so a private investor who invests money into startups in exchange for equity, some of the big 5 things they look for are the problem, the solution, the market opportunity, traction, and team. And within the team, they look at the founder, the people who surround the founder. Within the founder, they look at the resilience. How willing are they to get back up again after they've fallen to the ground, whether they've been met by failure? What does their mindset look like? And most of all, they look at pathological optimism. And so what this is this courage and this optimism to keep going even though you know success is almost impossible and failure is inevitable. It's a courage to continue to improve and reiterate a product or service even when you know you will fail hundreds and hundreds of times. And this optimism is not an ignorance of risk or ignorance of the complexities of business, but rather an optimism that you will get there at the end because you know you will put your 100% into it. At its core, it's an acknowledgement first and foremost that failure is inevitable. And so in our life, in the journey of life, failure is inevitable. Whatever you do, you will fail. And sometimes, most of the time actually, you won't know what you're doing. You won't know why you're doing it. And you won't have all the answers. And that's okay. See, the funny thing about failure is if you are failing, that in itself is a good thing. It's a great thing because that means you're actually trying. That means that the fact that you're failing means you can fall down and get up again. It means you can fall down and learn from your mistakes. But if you aren't failing, you're failing to fail. And so that is failure too. So either way you will fail, but one has a 50% chance of success and one has a chance of 0. So I always thought that I couldn't make a difference because I didn't know how. But over the years I realized I didn't need to because there is no right answer. There is no test. You know, when life threw lemons at me, sour things that I didn't enjoy, I threw lemons back at life and grew my own lemon trees. You have the power to shape your own story. You know, we're talking a lot about chances today. And it's so funny because the chance of you existing, actually, is 1 in 10 to the power of 2,685,000. So that's 10 with 2 million zeros after it. That's a chance of 2 million different people getting together in one room to play a dice game with a trillion-sided dice, and each of you getting 550,182,112 as a number, for example. And so the very chance that you are alive is 1, a miracle. But 2, a unique chance that life has given you to take control of your own story. You here have won the birth lottery. You here have had a chance, and by chance gotten into the school that you've gotten into, been able to come to this talk and listen to what I'm saying, and been able to exist. These things are all a unique chance that life has given us. You've won the birth lottery. You should know now that you can do a lot more than just make a difference in the world. If you want to, you can be that difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathaniel, for sharing your story as an educator and an entrepreneur. I'm sure we're all inspired to be the difference we want to make in the world. Our next speaker is Julianna Santos, and she speaks for the trees. As a PhD student at the School of Ecosystem and Forest Sciences at the University of Melbourne, Julianna is revolutionising the way we look at climate change. Welcome, Julianna.
My story begins 15 years ago, when I started my work as a wildlife ecologist back in my home country, Brazil. At that time, I was an undergrad student in biological science, and I asked one of my best professors at uni to join his research team. It was when I had the opportunity to know the northern muriqui, the largest species of monkey of the Americas. I think muriquis are quite special, and we humans may have a lot to learn from them. Well, with exception of physical distancing in times of pandemic. But I'm talking about the fact that muriquis are considered the most peaceful species of monkeys. Differently from other neotropical primates, muriquis live in an egalitarian society, which means that all individuals, males and females, are the same. There is no hierarchy. Aggressive behavior is something quite rare, as well as competition for food of females. The sad thing about the muriqui is the fact that they are on the verge of extinction, mostly because of habitat loss and hunting. Today, there are few populations remaining in nature, and all of them together do not surpass 1,000 individuals. At that time, my professors had a research project in the Caratinga Reserve, a protected area of 900 hectares located in the Atlantic rainforest, southeastern Brazil. 900 hectares correspond to roughly 900 rugby fields. You may think, oh, that's big, that's reasonable, but in terms of wildlife conservation, that's not enough at all. A fragment of forest of this size, surrounded by crop fields and pastures, is like an island for these monkeys that live mainly on the trees. Although the muriqui is still persisting there, they are quite isolated. At that time, I realized that animals and plants in these situations could be vanished by one infectious disease or one catastrophe like a fire. And like the northern muriqui, there are many species facing extinction in the world. The good side about the story of the muriqui is that there is an amazing effort to preserve these species, especially in the Caratinga Reserve, where wildlife ecologists have been monitoring these monkeys 7 days per week for more than 3 decades. And much of what we know about the species ecology and behavior come from studies conducted in the Caratinga Reserve. Besides, all the hard work of these ecologists to preserve Muriquis and its habitats also benefits other species in the Brazilian Atlantic rainforest. As wildlife ecologists, we study the interactions between wild animals, plants, and their habitats. We also quantify and assess threats to wildlife and what can drive them to extinction. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about some challenges wildlife ecologists like me have been facing and why we need your help. So after finishing my undergrad and my master's, I started working with environmental impact assessment to see, for example, how the construction of roads, hydroelectric power plants, and other developments affect fauna and flora. And I did that for a couple of years until I decided to come to Australia to do a PhD in ecology. Today, as a PhD candidate, I study how fire affects species of mammals. Before coming to Australia, I was pretty excited, As a wildlife ecologist, specialist in mammals like me, Australia is like a paradise. Koalas, kangaroos, wombats, possums, gliders, all these animals that you cannot find anywhere else on this planet. Yet, Australia has the worst rate of mammal extinction in the world. More than 10% of its original mammal fauna have become extinct since European settlement, and currently, almost 30% of all species are threatened with extinction. When I was a child, I would picture extinction in my mind by thinking of things like meteors and dinosaurs, but extinction in the contemporary world is a much closer reality. The ongoing process of environmental degradation, things like logging, pollution, land clearing, that leads to habitat loss, is a threat for many species in many countries. Apart from habitat loss, wildlife faces several other threats worldwide, like hunting, illegal trade, fire, and exotic species like cats and foxes. And on top of that, there is climate change. The thing is, all these threats can operate at the same time or be exacerbated by each other. For example, ecosystems affected by habitat loss are more vulnerable to fire and exotic species. And climate change is expected to increase the frequency and intensity of catastrophes, like the massive bushfires that we saw last summer in Australia. Although we know that species can disappear as a result of natural processes, all these threats together are leading to extinction rates without precedents. Recently, I have been analyzing some data on extinction risks for several groups. And even though I was aware of the significant biodiversity loss we are experiencing, looking at the actual numbers is quite scary. For example, data from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature shows that currently 18% of all vertebrates are threatened with extinction in the world. This includes fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Some groups are even more in danger. 4 out of 10 species of amphibians are at risk of disappearing. Amongst invertebrates like insects and plants, the figures look quite scary. This is because we know much less about these groups. For example, we know that 40% of all species of plants are threatened with extinction. However, the extinction risk has been evaluated for only 10% of the existing species of plants in the earth. That means that we have probably more species facing extinctions than we can estimate, and what is more, we are likely losing biodiversity that we even don't know yet. Because we are surrounded by so much uncertainty in terms of how many species we know and how many of them are facing extinction, protecting and recovering natural habitats is the best way to prevent that so many species disappear. By doing this, we are protecting even what we don't know yet. Besides, the benefits of protecting natural habitats go far beyond preventing species from disappearing. This is because natural ecosystems provide a huge number of priceless services, such as clean air, water, pollination for crops, medicines, erosion control, prevention of floods, everything essential to our life, well-being, and economy. So, throughout my career, I learned how to describe and quantify threats to wildlife, write papers and reports. This is crucial for understanding what drives species to extinction and what modifies our ecosystems. And we actually use this technical information to inform decision makers and people that are responsible for managing the environment. But I can say that this is just one part of what we need right now. As I said before, the rate of extinction is going much faster. We have several threats operating together, and we are probably losing biodiversity that we even don't know yet. Despite all those depressing facts, I realize that there is hope and there are opportunities. So the good thing is that you don't need to be a wildlife ecologist to help us. There are many other things you can do. For example, you can start with connecting with nature. Know your stuff. So people care about something they know they can relate to. Get to know the ecosystem surrounding you and the species that live there. For example, here in Australia, you'll see this massive and fascinating evolution lab just surrounding us. You have representatives of very old lineages such as the Ecdina and Platypus that helped us to understand how mammals evolved and dominated all types of environment. And come on, you can see a kangaroo every day, but it's a kangaroo. How exciting is this? You have possums walking around at night and many birds flying in the park close to you. I know this idea might be biased. As a wildlife ecologist, someone who loves nature, but I can assure you that there are many other benefits of connection with nature. Scientists have already confirmed that the contact with nature can reduce stress, fatigue, and bring happiness. It's amazing how much energy a 30-minute bushwalk can replenish. Well, if you are already convinced by what I just said and are wondering how you could engage even more, you can start with very simple things. For example, increase your knowledge about environmental issues, wildlife extinction, climate change, and then discuss this with your family and friends. You can also look for volunteering in your city council or other organizations close to you and help people out with reforestation projects, weed control, cleaning coastlines. And that is actually a great opportunity to meet new people and to make friends. Or you can join a citizen science project in your local area and help scientists to find and catalog species of orchids, frogs, reptiles. If you live close to the bush, you can start in your backyard by controlling weeds and using native plants for landscaping. It is also important that you keep your pets, like cats and dogs, inside the property. Needless to say, indigenous communities are the best custodians of the land. They have a deep and innate connection with nature, and they have been living in these ecosystems and managing these ecosystems for so many generations that they have a deep understanding of the ecosystem dynamics and the species. And this knowledge is really valuable for decision making and for management actions. We must protect and support our local traditional communities. And thinking globally, we need to do our best to not support companies that, as far as we know, have their profits based on things like environmental degradation, people's exploitation, and wildlife illegal trade. And lastly, but not least important, we need to choose politicians that first understand what is going on in our planet and second, are committed to do something about it. After all, we need effective policies and regulation to reduce greenhouse emissions and environmental degradation. And please, do not think that your single individual action cannot make difference, because that is not true. Do what is possible for you. That is already a huge help to the whole thing. We need to take action right now and shape a different story on this planet.
Thank you, Julianna, for sharing your story of challenges and opportunities in wildlife conservation and how we can shape the story of our planet. Our next speaker is the Lord of the Fries herself, Amanda Walker. Amanda met her boyfriend back in 2001 while teaching English at the same school in Taiwan. Both vegetarians, they realized that it was a constant challenge to find French fries that were cooked without beef tallow. When they moved back to Australia with insufficient funds for a restaurant, they bought a tiny food truck. Little did they know that they were founding what would become the biggest plant-based fast food chain in the Southern Hemisphere. Amanda now works as a business mentor and coach, inspiring others to choose and shape their own stories. And believe it or not, this CEO's favourite vegetable is potatoes. Welcome, Amanda.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. What an honour. My name is Amanda Lee Walker. I'm a transformational life and business coach, meditation teacher, and the co-founder of Lord of the Fries. 2004, without much food or business experience, and in a country with some of the highest meat consumption per capita, my boyfriend, his brother, and I managed to grow a business from a little vegetarian French fry festival food van to the international franchise it is today, the biggest vegan fast food chain in the Southern Hemisphere. It was a long road to get to where Lord of the Fries is now, and we wouldn't have been able to start it without the belief that we could do it, that we would do it, that it will work, which gave us the power to make the choices that got us here. And I wanted to share with you that if you change your beliefs, you can change your life. You have the potential to do anything. You just need to get through a few hurdles first. I'm not talking about time, money, education, age, or skills. The biggest hurdles are the limits you put on yourself. What if I told you that in 10 years' time, you'll be someone very important? You're going to create or do something amazing, life-changing. You will make a difference. Did you believe me? If someone had said this to me when I was 15 years old, I would have never believed them. At 15, I was a hot mess. I was on a wild mission to destroy my life. I was a taker, a crappy friend, a liar, runaway. I skipped school. I was in detention. I got suspended, grounded, yelled at, always in trouble. In my mind, it was always someone else's fault. She did it. I blamed everyone and took no responsibility. Everyone and everything else was controlling my destiny. It was never me. Like a magnet, I attracted a group of friends who were in a similar state of mind. And although everything we did, like sneaking out, having unauthorized house parties, drinking jungle juice, it all seemed like a really good idea at the time. It reached a climax when we borrowed one of our parents' cars, packed it with our pals, cranked up the music, cruised around the suburbs without a license after midnight. It was amazing for a moment, but the joyride came to a halt when we heard the sirens. We stopped in the middle of the street, opened the 4 doors, and ran in 7 different directions. A few days later, we were all separated from each other. Some shipped across the country to boarding schools, some to foster homes, family friend, detention centers, and I found myself spending the year of grade 10 living in a different city, in a home for troubled adolescents. And I finally asked myself, what the hell have I been doing? I had all the things it takes to make a great go of life. I thought I was a victim. Until I read the writing on the wall, and it was literally written on the wall. It said, what you believe on the inside, you will manifest on the outside. Got me thinking, I was a rebel against myself. I must have believed in some way that I wasn't worthy. I wasn't worth anything. Nothing mattered. And I made the choices to prove it. I was creating a vision of a life opposite to what I wanted. I was playing small, I was hiding. All of us have 2 streams of beliefs. We have empowering and limiting beliefs. The empowering beliefs sound like I can do it. I'm worthy, I'm lovable, I'm enough. These beliefs are the ones that lift us up and allow us to do the things we want to do in our lives. They give us the confidence that leads to success and happiness. The limiting beliefs are the ones that whisper, you're not good enough. Who do you think you are? You're going to blow it. And these are the beliefs that will stop you from getting what you want. They are the ones that make you act in ways you wish you didn't. You don't even know why you did that. And then you think thoughts that really hurt. You can feel them in your body like a tension that squeezes when you bump up against them, and you don't feel good at all. These beliefs can be so strong that you accept them as facts. Facts about yourself, facts about others, facts about the world. They are parts of you that are being ruled by a frustrated 4-year-old. Because most beliefs, these core beliefs, are created before the age of 8, when we're in a theta brainwave state. It's like being in a state of hypnosis. We're taking in information from everyone, from everywhere, from everything. And we form beliefs so we can make sense of the world. And at first, the beliefs all had a positive intention. They make sense of the good things, which we want to do more of. More love, more affection, more attention. And also for the bad things, we come up with the conclusion that will protect us from ever feeling bad like that again in the future. We made the beliefs up based on how we process the situation. They are the map of our inner universe that we created to help us navigate the world. Let's have a quick peek at the belief, the popular belief, the most popular belief that I'm not enough. Let's look under the hood. It has many branches that are related. It sounds something like I'm not smart enough, not capable, not good looking, stuff like that. The origin of this can come in many ways. Some are very traumatic, some are more innocent. Here's a simple example. Okay, you're 3 years old, you want to paint. You pull the paints out, you paint the walls. Your mom or dad or your carer comes in, "What are you doing? You're so bad. That was so bad. You're so stupid." Your little child mind draws some 3-year-old conclusion, and it sparks the seed of 2 potential limiting beliefs. 1, I'm bad. Not the paint on the walls, but me. 2, if I don't paint, I will never get in trouble. There goes the next Picasso. Maybe you're the youngest kid in the family. This is another example. You're 4 years old, your brother's 7. You constantly compare yourself to them. You think you should be able to do whatever they can do because, you don't know otherwise, but you can't keep up with them. Then you tell yourself, I'm not as good as them. I can't do it as well as other people. You know what? Someday I'm going to try. Then I won't be disappointed. And this little seed goes into your subconscious, and you forget about it, but it's there. You're young, you don't have the context, you don't have the deeper concepts. You think the world revolves around you. You think it's about you. You think you are bad. You not think what you did was bad, you think it's you. And that is how the initial belief forms. It gets frozen in time, bundled with all of those painful feelings that you had. Then you tuck it away, but it doesn't go away. For the most part, many of these events don't stick around. They do sort of evolve and grow. You let go of them. I mean, you don't still believe in the tooth fairy, right? But in some cases, like I said, they don't go away. They get stuck energetically in your mind, your body, your feelings. They become the basis of who you think you are. So it's when I'm not good enough shifts from something that you're doing to something that you are, your sense of worth diminishes. You close the doors to the possibility. You believe the lie. The belief grows into a little monster and takes on a life of its own. It becomes that nasty inner critic. It becomes the filter for how you see yourself and your place in the world. It's a function of our minds, to support these beliefs. So you will always find evidence of what you're looking for. You will find anything to support it and ignore everything that contradicts it. Let's do a little thing now. For 5 seconds, I want you to look around the room and notice everything that's red. Count all the red objects. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now close your eyes. And I want you to remember how many red objects you saw. How many blue objects did you see? None, right? Because you were focused on the red. And yeah, it's funny when it's colors, but it's not funny at all when you're trying to prove that you're not enough. So now you see, from some big misunderstanding of who I really was, well, that's how I ended up in the home for troubled youth, where I had the wake-up call. Thank God I had the wake-up call. Had a loving home. Some other kids had no home to go to. I had parents and friends that supported me. Some kids had no one except the law. Learned what the other kids had gone through, and I began to explore myself, find my true self again. Professor Joseph Campbell, the author of The Power of Myth, writes, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek." That cave holds your limiting beliefs. That cave holds the truth of you. If you are willing to explore those beliefs and their roots, you will find that on the other side is the person that you want to be, You can be free. The things that I thought were bad or wrong about me, the shame of who I thought I was that I was sort of trying to hide, that wasn't my true self. I did the work. I started to love and value myself again. I started to believe myself. I gave myself a chance, and my life headed in a new direction. In order to live the life that you want, you must become a belief hunter and a thought detective. Thoughts and beliefs are close companions. Thoughts can lead you to your truth, but you are not your thoughts. Listen to them, but don't always believe them. Get curious when you get a negative or critical thought, when you hear that about yourself. Catch it and ask, is this thought leading me to where I want to go? Would I talk to someone I love like this? Is it true? Follow it downward. What belief might it be tied to? When did I first start to believe this? Who would I be without this? What could I think instead? And as you sift through your thoughts and beliefs, you can feel them, heal them, deal with them, and let them go. But you have to feel them, and that's the hard part. But you're worth it. You know, everyone has these beliefs that empower them and limit them. Nobody's without them. It's not unique to anyone. Even the people you consider the most successful, accomplished, wealthiest, happiest, most loving people have limiting beliefs, but they see them for what they are. As a coach and mentor, I've seen many people move through and out of their limiting beliefs. They lift their ceilings, they break through their prisons, they change their beliefs and their life changes. You can do it too. You are worth it. When you have the awareness to hear your thoughts, you can choose where to put your focus. I urge you, choose to focus on the things that light you up, that let you shine, the things that are true to your heart, the big dreams that come up from your soul. Dream so big, and you'll be surprised at how much life supports you. It's amazing. Focus on the things you want to happen. Feel them as if they're real. Feel them as if they're true. And you'll notice things will happen that will move you towards your goals. You'll start to find the opportunities. Every day you make heaps of choices. Some are major, minor, but they all lead you in a direction. I made a major choice in grade 11 when I did a project on animal husbandry. I chose to give up meat and become a vegetarian. It was a very powerful move. It wasn't a popular choice, but it gave me a sense of purpose and a feeling that my choices were meaningful every day. And in my conviction, I felt a path forming, and I knew that the experience I was creating was my own destiny. Not everyone's supportive, and it will be the same for you when you make your choices, when they align with your heart. The most important person to be on your side is yourself. When you stand by your choice, things get incredible. You attract people, experiences, opportunities that are on the same path as you. Life begins to happen for you and not to you. That choice to become a vegetarian, I can see now, led me to Taiwan 2002, where I met my husband from Australia, who is also a vegetarian. Together we formed a vision of a business that would align with our beliefs and create the change we want to see in the world. Together with his brother, who is also a vegetarian, 2004, we created Lord of the Fries, our vegan fast food business. So, you've got more power than you realize. It's all inside of you. Every thought, belief, feeling, it's your creation. You're a creator. You make it up, and you can change it. I want you to do something with me right now. Just close your eyes for a moment, put your hand on your heart. In your mind's eye, picture yourself in the future, having let go of all your fears and limits. Your true self is your guide. Look at you. You can see yourself. You look so good. What are you wearing? Who are you hanging out with? What are you doing? What's the environment you're in? It's amazing. What are you doing that makes you feel happy? Feel those feelings of someone who made the choices that are right for them. The choice is using your own unique gifts in the world. Feel what it feels like to be your true self. And imagine that you're creating the future. Open your eyes. Once I'm done, write it down and look at it every day. At the beginning of this talk, I asked you to imagine that in 10 years' time, you'd be someone important. I would like you to believe that you are that person right now. Thanks so much for listening.
thanks, Amanda, for sharing your story and how changing your beliefs can change your life. Our last speaker before our next 5-minute break is another teacher at MacRob. Born and raised in Japan, Hiroko Mori has shaped her story all across the globe. She studied Danish at Tokai University and in Denmark. She has cruised India, Sri Lanka, Kenya, and Greece for Ship for World Youth. And in 1999, she moved to Australia, where she received her graduate diploma and Master of Applied Linguistics. She now works as a Japanese language teacher at the Mac.Robertson Girls High School, inspiring our bright young girls to take charge of their own path. Welcome, Mori Sensei.
Hello, I'm Hiroko Mori. Hiroko means a wealthy child. Mori means a forest. I'm a Japanese language teacher at MacRob. I love languages. When I was a university student, I had an opportunity to study Danish language, culture, and society in Denmark. So I started summer school at International People's College in Helsingør. At one lunchtime, I had a chat with a Spaniard. He asked me a question. Do you think if I believe in Buddhism, I can be happy? I answered the question in this way. I think so. Without any reasons whatsoever. But it was a starting point to think if the Buddhism can help us to be happy. After going back to Japan, one day I saw my father chant in front of the Buddhist altar at home. Gyate, gyate, hara, gyate, hara, so gyate, boji, so waka, hanya, shingyo. It was a Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra is a short set of phrases. As it's short and condensed, it's not easy to understand. So I'm going to share 2 things I understand so far. 1. We are always changing. We are changing every single second. 2. The world doesn't have any feelings and values. We put them. Just imagine black and white picture. We color the picture with our feelings and values. Then I thought, I don't have to stick to my negative feelings, such as worrying about future, feeling bad about myself by comparing with other people. I wish I could tell you I have been succeeded. It's like make 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards. So this is my way to remind myself to be positive. I'm lucky because I know I'm lucky. What we have is not matter of course. What we have is result of the previous people's effort. For example, mobile phones. 20 years ago, when I first came to Australia, I didn't have mobile phones. I'm not talking about smartphones. I'm talking about mobile phones. Another example is water. I like traveling. I traveled more than 20 countries. In many countries, when you turn the water tap, you can get clean, clear water. But in some areas, that's not the case. I was told, you can wash your hands and have a shower, but don't drink the water. Traveling taught me a lot, and so did history. I used to live with my grandparents as well. My grandmother collected all leftover rice in the rice cooker because she didn't have enough food during the Second World War. And on the 1st of September in 1923, my grandfather was heading to Yokohama. Yokohama is a big city near Tokyo. He was excited. He was looking forward to his new life in Yokohama. Then a big earthquake happened. So he had to go back to his hometown. If he traveled on the previous day, I wouldn't have been born. Last year, a colleague sent me a photo during the study trip to Germany. It says, Memento Mori. At first I thought, memory of Mori. Later on, I found out Memento Mori means remember. We are all mortal. We don't live forever. That reminds of me a friend from University Choir Club who left us because of leukemia at the age of 23. I was sad. But now I can say I'm happy because I know her. I have good memories with her. I'm a wealthy child, not with money, but with wonderful people like her. I'm still studying how the Buddhism can help us to be happy. But one thing I'm quite sure is we are all chosen ones because we were born on this beautiful earth with forest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mori Sensei, for sharing your story with finding happiness through Buddhism. We will now have another short break to give you all a break from your screens and a chance to reflect on the stories you've heard so far. What resonated with you? Tune back in after 5 minutes to continue hearing from our final few fabulous speakers. We'll see you shortly. Welcome back to the third and final segment of our speaker presentations for today. We hope you had a chance to think about the stories you've heard so far during the break. Our first speaker now is one of MacRob's social service captains, Hannah Senior. Hannah is an acclaimed advocate for social service and entrepreneurship. She holds multiple awards and honours for her outstanding contributions to youth empowerment and innovation. In 2019, Hannah studied at Yale University for their Young Global Scholars Sustainable Development and Social Entrepreneurship program as a Yale Young Global Scholar. Welcome, Hannah.
Throughout my time in high school, the question of whether social media is preferable to face-to-face communication has been debated every year. The main arguments for real-life communication are that it's honest, it's personal, we can use our body language to communicate, and we can't hide our feelings or simply sign off whenever we wish. Whereas, for online communication, it's convenient. We can always choose when and where to engage, as well as connect to more people than ever before. But does that convenience really liberate us? Does that level of access actually free us up to connect more deeply than we did before? The current COVID-19 situation has limited our capacity for in-person communication, leaving us with only the option to communicate online. An Australian Bureau of Statistics study showed results that indicated that the pandemic has led to 1 in every 5 Australians suffering from loneliness. In many ways, though, COVID has only exacerbated a sense of isolation we were already feeling, whereas before we had our in-person selves and our online selves. Now, we're only limited to the latter, and I believe it's cutting us off from each other. We are constantly trying to present ourselves as what we want other people to see, often making us feel alone, making us feel that no one in our social circle really understands the real versions of who we are. We are constantly plugged in. When we send or receive a text, we hardly think about it. There's no intention behind our communication. It's just a default setting. And when we post on social media, our primary thoughts are about how to make ourselves look like the best or prettiest or smartest versions of ourselves. Who we are day to day never feels like enough. During any other time, this will be the part where I recommend that everyone dive back into in-person communication. But of course, that's not an option right now. COVID has forced our hands. Online communication is all we've got. Luckily, there are some things we can do to form genuine connections on a small scale that feels much more tangible, intentional, and honest than liking a photo on Instagram or sending a Snapchat. I'm here as living proof that there are ways to get to the heart of who people are and what they're experiencing, even when we can't see each other in person. The truth is, a month into this pandemic, I was getting tired of that feeling, the sense that we are texting for the sake of texting, rather than as a result of wanting to thoughtfully communicate and connect. So, in order to try and break down that barrier, I started Global Youth Voices and Letters Against ISO. These initiatives are small relative to other modern mediums of communication, yet they're connecting people in a way that feels more tangible. The goal of Global Youth Voices is to unpack people more, breaking through the surface level. We run short interviews with young people across the world, learning about each of their unique stories and situations. We use social media, but only as a vehicle for sharing real people's stories, thoughts, fears, hopes, and desires. It's a different way of using Instagram than how most people do. But so far, we found our audience loves connecting and relating to short, honest tidbits from people around the world. Letters Against ISO is a community organisation that sends letters to aged care residents all across Australia. 80% of our writers are high school students, and together we write encouragement letters every week to elderly residents. The aim of this is to bridge the gap between young people and the elderly, for us to support them during this unpredictable time. But the goal is also personal to me. I wanted to feel like my thoughts and words meant something again. I wanted to have a reason to put time and care into communicating with other people. Putting down my phone and picking up a pen turned out to be the great way to do that. Writing a letter requires time and attention, and intention. That's the key. It's not swiping, taking a millisecond and clicking like, and then swiping further. It's 5, 10, 15 minutes to sit and consider what to write to someone you don't know. Someone whose feelings you inherently care about, someone who you want to validate, and someone who you know will want to validate you back. Sure, convenience is great, but sometimes it's nice to have a thoughtful process behind the parts of our lives that we share. And that's what letter writing is. Letters Against ISO is specifically for young people to communicate with those isolated in aged care homes. There's something profoundly humble and reverential about meeting older people where they are, about using a medium of communication that they grew up with to talk to them. In some ways, it's a homage to a time long past. These days, we almost never take time out to do things the way others would like them to do. We're so often focused on how we want things done. There's real value in that adjustment, in that additional time spent, in the patience and thoughtfulness it requires. It slows us down, helps us think things through and reflect. I created Letters Against ISO because I longed for a form of communication that didn't feel superficial, that didn't prioritize convenience over depth. I'm not naive. I know social media is our present and our future. But I also know that humans spent thousands of years communicating via the written word, taking hours and days and weeks to go back and forth with one another. I know that our average reply time now is mere seconds, and I know that something is lost in that haste. Anyone can create something like this, like Global Youth Voices or Letters Against ISO. It took a little idea and a little effort, but honestly, there are so many ideas waiting out there for someone to take initiative with. So many ways to connect us more deeply, to help us understand each other. Take an interest you have, such as art, music, sports, or video games, and with a little bit of time, you can turn it into your very own project, especially if you're a high school student. For example, if you love art, invite people to join a Zoom call where each artist shares their own personal art for 5 minutes. Create an online museum where upcoming artists can connect through their combined love for art. With some organization, you could also even organize a speaker series by sending a few emails out to people at the top of their artistic fields. The point is, there's a reason so many of us are feeling disconnected right now, and it's not only because we can't see each other in person. If we take the time and put in the effort, there are ways for us to connect to one another honestly and deeply. It can start with something as simple as a single letter, sent to a person eager to read it.
Thank you, Hannah, for sharing with us the power of a genuine connection and how it shapes our stories. Now, it might be easier to talk about what our next speaker, Rod Watson, isn't than what he is. He made his career as a mathematician, spent 20 years as a civil marriage celebrant, and has been a broadcaster at classical music radio station 3MBS for over 20 years too. Rod has majors in pure and applied mathematics with a statistics submajor, as well as postgraduate qualifications in history and the philosophy of science, especially in 16th to 17th century maths. He enjoyed many years of teaching maths and attempted to retire as an assistant principal at South Oakley Secondary College. Since then, he has enjoyed classroom teaching and has been doing relief work at MacRob since 2005. He has been a setter and marker of VCE maths and regularly speaks to teachers at Meet the Examiners meetings. Rod has 3 children, the eldest of whom attended MacRob, and 5 grandchildren. He also loves trams and trains. Welcome, Mr. Watson.
Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. In preparing to talk to you today, I could not resist consulting some of the great minds who walked this planet Earth, such as Albert Einstein. Einstein also said, "Don't listen to someone who knows all the answers. Listen to someone who asks all the questions." Independently of Einstein, I've been telling students over the years that, I quote, You never get the right answer unless you ask the right question. So I'll be encouraging you to seek and work out what are the key questions and to try to answer them. I'm Rod Watson, and I've been doing various mathematical tasks at Mac.Robertson Girls High School in Melbourne since 2005. I was involved as a school counsellor, as a parent when my daughter attended last century. What about getting the right question? Two of my examples involve mathematics, but these are accessible to non-mathematicians. First of all, suppose that an express train travels from Melbourne to Stawell, a rural regional town, 240 kilometres away at 120 kilometres per hour. On its return, it travels at 80 kilometres per hour. Ignoring starting, stopping, and little things like that, what's the average speed for the journey? You might like to jump in straight away and say 100 kilometres per hour because 120 plus 80, all divided by 2 equals 100. But let's have a look at that. If the forward journey is 140 kilometres at 120 kilometres per hour, the time taken will be 2 hours. For the return journey of 240 kilometres at 80 kilometres per hour, it will take 3 hours. This gives a total of 5 hours. But if we look at 5 hours travel at 100 kilometres per hour, the purported average speed, the train would actually travel 500 kilometres, not 480. Something must be wrong. The key question that must be asked is, what does average speed really mean? Well, what about total distance travelled divided by time for the journey, which is 480 kilometres divided by 5 hours, and that's 96. So 96 kilometres per hour is the average speed, not 100. So the obvious answer is not necessarily the correct one. My second example comes from calculus, but don't worry, if you have not, nor never will study it, the example does not involve high mathematics. Have a look at the diagram. We have 2 corridors that meet at right angles. Suppose that one is p metres across and the other is q metres across. What is the length of the longest thin pole that can be carried horizontally around the corner? Thinking about the problem, are we asked to find a maximum distance? It appears so. But if we really try to delve out what is wanted, the penny might drop that the length of the longest thin pole is represented by the shortest distance from wall to wall by just touching the inside corner, as you can see in the diagram. So when really seeking out the question of what appeared to be initially a question to find the maximum distance is actually finding a minimum one. Paradoxical? Perhaps. Another example comes from building infrastructure in cities. It is the job of state governments to work out what's the best way to get people to and from work, as well as students to and from school, and assist. In many cases, this has resulted in spending lots of money building motorways. But what is the question? Should we be aiming to move vehicles, often carrying one person, or moving people? A train carrying 900 passengers is more efficient in terms of energy than 600 cars that might be used instead. Train would be quicker for many passengers. And I'm not arguing for not spending money on roads. We do need an efficient and safe road system, but we can really do better moving people. So seeking out what is the right question requires research. What is the most efficient way of moving people to their destinations? Since the arrival of Europeans in 1788 in Australia, Indigenous people have suffered disadvantage. There have been advances such as the Mabo decision, but there is still much poverty and lack of educational opportunity. Australian governments have tried to decide what is best. Finally, the National Agreement on Closing the Gap has answered a key question. What do Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders think will improve outcomes? This results in the Coalition of Peaks. I'm not sure whether First Nations people have ever been asked about their needs in quite this way in setting up this committee. There's also a related question resulting from the severe bushfires. Archaeologists seem to agree that off-season burning of forests by Indigenous people was done in such a way that out-of-control bushfires did not occur. There's still a further question to be answered. How should remaining native grasslands be managed to preserve their integrity and also to allow native animals to flourish? There is work to be done, and quite possibly by the younger generation. We're starting to realise that the management of the environment by Indigenous people over thousands of years was very successful. Somewhat more deviously, there are organisations that ask the key question about how can we appear to do something, but in fact end up doing the opposite. In a recent Four Corners program on PBS Frontlife in the USA about recycling, it showed about Big Plastic used the idea of recycling to draw attention away from the industry itself, allowing it to expand exponentially. Big Plastic came out in favour of recycling. Their aim was to increase the volume of plastics used by clever marketing. We've now reached a situation where there are 9 billion kilograms of plastics deposited in the oceans annually, more than 1 kilogram per person. Some of these plastics break down into micro or even nanoparticles and work their way up the food chain. Rather than reduce, reuse, recycle, should we as consumers not refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle as far as plastics are concerned? This might go some of the way of answering the question of what we can do to reduce or even eliminate rubbish that is damaging our environment. We in Australia have currently stockpiles of rubbish that has nowhere to go. And also remember that the chasing arrows on the back of plastic containers is no guarantee of reuse or recycling. Sometimes asking what's thought to be the right question can lead to failure. This is not necessarily a bad thing. Have you heard of WD-40? It comes in spray cans and can be used as a cleaning agent, a lubricant, and for assisting the removal of a nut that had rusted onto a bolt, amongst other things. But why is it called WD-40? Apparently getting the formulation right meant that there were 39 unsuccessful attempts before achieving the product that was desired at the 40th attempt. Failure causes us to go back and question our assumptions and check whether there are questions that were not asked or factors that were not considered. Failure has played a major part in the advancement of scientific knowledge in the 20th century. In 1887, Albert Michelson and Edward Morley conducted an experiment to determine the existence of a weightless, or the current terminology of then, imponderable fluid, known as the ether, that was supposed to be the carrier of light waves, by measuring the speed of light in two perpendicular directions and detecting the difference. The experiment failed to detect any difference, which led to the theory of special relativity as proposed by Albert Einstein in 1905. Einstein wrote, "If the Michelson-Morley experiment had not brought us into serious embarrassment, no one would regard the relativity theory as an embarrassment. Often, issues come up for debate in the media and other places, and there are accusations of bias. This leads to raise a matter of false balance, or both-sideism, or the fallacy of equal time, as philosophers of science have called it. This is where an issue is being presented as being more balanced between opposing viewpoints than the evidence supports. You should be aware of groups of people who are very vocal about the right not to have their children vaccinated against common diseases. These people are usually known as anti-vaxxers. Should they be given equal time with those who support child vaccination? Where is the evidence? Is a question that should be asked. There are diseases that have been virtually eliminated by vaccination, such as chickenpox, measles, and mumps, all of which I had as a child, incidentally. Measles, for example, can be fatal. On a global scale, smallpox has been virtually eliminated, whereas it used to have a devastating effect on populations. I remember attending primary school where a girl had her legs in irons because she contracted poliomyelitis or polio. Again, this is extremely rare in Australia due to vaccination. So, do anti-vaxxers have the right to equal time? I don't think so. I led the rider that there will always be a small number of children who, for various reasons, genetic or otherwise, where vaccination could be life-threatening. And of course, this needs to be taken into account. What I question is blanket arguments against vaccination. Is this why there are no papers supporting anti-vaccination or non-vaccination? Scientific papers have to go through a process of peer review before they're published. There have been some communities, even in Australia, who've regarded COVID-19 as a hoax. Well, should we feel sorry for the man in the USA who announced that COVID-19 was a hoax and to prove it went to a party where he contracted the virus and then died? What about climate change and global warming? These have been a topic for discussion for many years. Should equal time be given to those who are deniers? Around 95% of Australian scientists accept the evidence of climate change in raised temperatures, more extreme weather, melting of ice caps in polar regions, melting of permafrost in the Arctic, movement of sea creatures further from the equator, and possible permanent damage to the Great Barrier Reef, with fossil fuel burning and deforestation being two principal factors. There seems to be general acceptance among younger Australians at least. The problem is serious and needs to be addressed urgently. But out of this arises a paradox. Why is it that some accept peer-reviewed science which tells us about COVID-19 and its dangers, then asserts that climate change is a hoax or even a plot? Climate change also poses the most difficult of questions. Is global population a problem? This question was asked by the Club of Rome way back in 1968 and was followed with its report in 1972, The Limits to Growth. As the global population grows and arable land becomes a desert, how can we feed more and more people, especially given the number of people currently living in poverty? This younger generation will have to work hard on it, being aware of national and religious issues, such as the power of terrorist groups and vested interests. Good luck. Let's return to Einstein again. The important thing is not to stop questioning, he said. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. Or again, imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. I was watching War of the Worlds on TV recently, and Jules Verne, the author of the original book, was quoted in saying, "What is the most important scientific discovery?" Answer: ignorance. Admitting our ignorance may take a lot of courage, but we need to face up to our ignorance all the same. Technology may help design solutions. I recently heard a Science Week talk that the University of New South Wales in trimester 3 this year is offering the world's first degree in quantum engineering. I believe that some of the answers of the questions presenters may come from this sort of technology. But don't forget, we are human beings, and so it is the humanities that humanise it. We all need to keep things in proper perspective and support the study of the humanities. Finally, did curiosity kill the cat? Writer Graham Swift wrote in Waterland, "People die when curiosity goes. People have to find out. People have to know. How can there be any true revolution till we know what we're made of?" So be curious. Ask questions. Look for answers. And if you don't find them, try asking different questions. I wish you well in your endeavours. May you keep posing questions while you're able to do so. I'm Rod Watson, and you have my best wishes.
Thanks, Mr. Watson, for highlighting the importance of curiosity and getting the right answers by asking the right questions. Now, if you thought you couldn't be a high school student and activist all at once, 16-year-old Siena Rigazzi, our next speaker, would prove you wrong. As a volunteer with the Australian Youth Climate Coalition and SS4C, this Year 11 MacRobian emceed for the SS4C January 17th Bushfire Vigil and met with Lily D'Ambrosio, the Victorian Minister for the Environment, to discuss climate solutions. Thank you for shaping our stories, and welcome, Siena.
Hi, my name's Siena Rigazzi. I'm 17 years old and I'm a student and a climate justice activist. And I'm just going to jump right into it and be completely honest and blunt. I am really, really angry. We have heard so many people, young, old, scientists, students, Indigenous elders, stand on a stage or a platform and talk about how bad climate change is and how urgently we need to act and how we are running out of time and how severe and dire this is and how much this is affecting us. You know, over the past 2 years, we've seen the emergence of the school strike movement. We've seen millions of people, students, teachers, workers, striking from their workplace and their schools to protest a lack of action on this issue. And still, we are not seeing the appropriate action we need to combat this issue. I just don't understand how. At first, I thought the reason that we weren't reacting at the level we needed to be was because of a lack of education. And I definitely think that that is a part of it. But the only problem with that is that climate change is not a secret. You know, maybe 5-10 years ago, we could argue that a lot of people just don't know that this is happening. But at least up until COVID-19, like I said, we were seeing millions of people out on the street striking, you know, against this issue. Climate change deniers do exist, but they are a really, really small minority. The majority of the population, they know what climate change is and they acknowledge that it's happening. And still, you know, most of us aren't seriously freaking out about a lack of action. How are we not there yet? You know, I considered it, but I think it's very incorrect to say that it is because humans are the disease and we're, you know, inherently selfish people, and as a society we only care about ourselves and we don't care about each other and the planet, and that's the reason we're in the position that we're in. I don't think that is true. I think that's completely incorrect. So I've come to the conclusion that the reason on an individual level we aren't all seriously freaking out about climate change yet is because there's a difference between knowing what climate change is and then actually comprehending what is happening. Like, there's some kind of disconnect there. I think we're massively desensitized, and I think it's really easy to look at climate change as a political issue or a scientific issue or an economic issue or a social issue, but I don't think we're at a point yet where we're feeling what is happening on an emotional level. As put by climate scientist Joel Gerkes, we need to feel the devastation that is the impacts of climate change on our planet. It's a really sad thing that we're living through right now. The fact that our human activity is leading to threats to our own livelihoods, that is ending lives, that is killing off species and ecosystems, that is devastating. And I think that reading the facts and statistics, it's really hard to feel it on an emotional level, and I think that's one of the main reasons that we're not reacting with the energy that we need to be yet. Also, especially for the people who aren't experiencing the effects of climate change anymore, people living in urbanized areas in, developed nations, I think because right now we're not feeling the effects of climate change yet, I think it's really hard to visualize and comprehend what is happening. It is really difficult to comprehend the fact that 50% of Vietnam is going to be underwater by 2050. It's really difficult to comprehend what it will look like seeing bushfires more frequently, seeing natural disasters more frequently, and linking that back to our own human activity. That is such a difficult thing to visualize and comprehend, but that is the reality. I got involved with climate activism myself about 2 years ago, but before then, I was exactly like what I'm describing. I knew the definition of climate change, I knew what it meant, I knew that was happening, I learned a bit about it in school, I would never deny it, but I don't know, I never could comprehend how bad it was. I hadn't had that realization yet. The realization of how bad climate change is, that is massive privilege. And that comes to the people who are not living through its effects. First Nations people, people living in rural and farming communities, people living in desertified regions like the Sahel where they can't grow their food, people living on coastal areas or island nations where their land is threatened by rising sea levels, people whose houses have been burnt down by the bushfires. They don't get to have this shocking realization of how bad climate change is and how devastating what we're experiencing actually is on an emotional level. They are experiencing its effects through their everyday life. Like I said, I live in a urbanized area. My life is completely free from the effects of climate change. And because the education in my school on climate change is not completely comprehensive just yet, there's nothing in my life that would allow me to have that comprehension of how bad climate change is through my own experiences. That had to be a realization to me. Now, I don't plan on talking too much about the actual science or statistics of climate change today, just because everything I've learned from another person. I'm not a researcher or a scientist myself. I'm not at that stage yet. Also, the internet could provide you with far more facts and resources than I ever could, especially in one talk. So, I'll allow you to do that research yourself. But I just will say this. Like most people, I would assume, I was really sad in grade 2 when I learned how turtles, they eat plastic bags and they die because they think they're jellyfish. I felt a little sad in grade 5 when I learned how drought, caused by changes in our weather patterns from the smoke from our cars and our factories, that's, making it really hard for farmers to grow their crops, and that might lead to food shortages in the future. I remember in year 7 when I learned about Kiribati and how their government is literally planning to evacuate because they know that there is no hope. It is inevitable. That land that they've been living on for thousands of years, that will be submerged by rising sea levels, and there's nothing they can do about it. Throughout my education, I have read these stories in my textbooks and heard these facts and figures. And, when I'm in class, I'm able to feel, wow, like, that's sad, that's scary, that's shocking. But I don't know, there's always been some kind of disconnect between what I was learning and actually picturing that that is happening in real life, that these are real people that I'm reading about, not just a story in my textbook. As I started to get older, though, I started to look closer. I learned about the issue of climate injustice as opposed to just climate change, how, this issue is affecting people disproportionately. It really does discriminate. I learned how the people who are doing the least to cause climate change are being affected the most, and the people who are causing climate change are benefiting from it, the CEOs of the mining companies. I learned about transnational corporations and their greed and the extent to which they exploit countries for their labor and their land for their own financial gain. I learned more about the science of climate change. I learned about how we have all the solutions and we're just not implementing them. I learned about how dire and pressing that this actually is. This is going to affect my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, but it's not just about them. This is going to affect my life. This is about me. And then I learned that this actually isn't even about me, because there are people dead and dying today because of climate change. I don't know when it was or where I was or what the specific fact or figure was, but at one point something changed. And I went from just, knowing climate change and that it was happening and knowing that as a fact to feeling that emotionally, what it meant, what was happening and how dire and scary it actually is. And I just became so devastated. And I still am so devastated, because when you realize what we're going through and how bad it is, there is just so little else to feel. That realization of how bad climate change is, it changes you. It changed my life completely. And until, as a society, we start taking climate change into account with every decision we make and everything we do, until our governments start to implement climate solutions and consider that as a part of every single decision they make, it proves that we haven't had the realization of how bad climate change is yet. We haven't comprehended that yet. The tricky thing about climate action is, though, is that it's a bit of a paradox. Because the truth is, as great it is when individuals choose to purchase a keep cup or a metal straw so that they can live their lives in a more environmentally friendly way, all those small, minor consumer eco-friendly changes that we can make in our lives, one, they're not affordable to everyone, so we can't expect everyone to partake in that. And two, they have a very, very small impact. And to take on this crisis, we don't have time for a movement as gradual as telling all our friends to start op shopping. Also, blaming and shaming individual actions is completely wrong, because as individuals, even though some of our actions do perpetrate climate change, for example, if you have a car and you drive anywhere, yes, that does have an effect on climate change, but it is not any individual's fault that this is the way our society is structured and this is the way that we live. It is the fault of the governments who are choosing not to act on this, and the transnational corporations who continue to act like this for their own financial benefit. And so it's completely wrong to blame individuals and shame individuals and say that it's the individual's responsibility to make a change on this. But those governments and those transnational corporations, they didn't change their actions when we started learning about climate change and how bad it was and what was happening. And they didn't change their actions 2 years ago when the school strike movement began and we started seeing mass protests against climate change on a global scale. Transnational corporations and governments, they continue to acknowledge climate change on their website, but they continue not to act. And that's one of the biggest problems we have. For me, the scariest thing is when my government, they acknowledge that climate change is happening, they don't even try to deny it, but they justify not even bare minimum action by talking about the economy. I could go into the benefits that, renewable energy will have on the economy, but I won't even go there. I'll just say this. Yes, it's okay to be concerned about the economy, that it is valid, is okay to have that concern, but if we are letting our concerns about the economy stop us from acting on climate change, it is just proof that we have no idea how bad climate change is at all. We don't have a clue. If we look back in history at World War I and World War II, when we were threatened with war, our governments encouraged people to run out of their workplaces and onto the front line. And we turned our car making factories into weapon making factories. And we didn't for a second think, but what about the economy? Because we knew we had a threat to our livelihoods and the livelihoods of others that far outweighed the economy. It made talking about that, compared to the loss of life and that experience, completely immeasurable. It's kind of the same thing with COVID-19. Like, the governments that kept trying to keep people out on the street, avoided doing lockdowns, trying to keep people consuming and keeping the economy turning, those are the countries that had the most people sick and the most people dead and are struggling the most right now. And the economy has crashed anyway. The economy can recover, it always has, but we can't get lives back. We can't get extinct species back. We can't get ecosystems back. Once land goes underwater, there's no getting that back. So why do we not react to climate change with the same energy that we reacted to war or that some governments reacted to COVID-19? Part of it is probably because of how gradual it is. Like, it doesn't spread like a pandemic. The effects that we're seeing now of climate change were caused by our actions so many years ago. The thing is, though, it's not because it's not bad enough yet. I think so many people believe that we're not at a point in climate change where, it's so bad that we need to start acting. We're there now. It is bad right now. In Australia, you'd think that the bushfires we experienced this summer would be a massive wake-up call to so many people, but we're still using the economy to justify a lack of action on climate change, and that just proves that we have no idea what's going on. And the thing is, the nature of climate change is that our actions today, they affect what's going to happen in the future. So when we get to a point where we decide that we want to act, it's already going to be too late. In the bushfires this summer, so many people lost their lives and their houses. It was absolutely devastating. It was not nothing. But it's only the beginning. It is going to get so much worse from there, and the longer we wait to act, the worse it's going to be. So unjust as it is that it has fallen on the people to act when it's not our fault, it is our responsibility to act now, because we're not going to get that change from anywhere else. Individuals, especially those from my community who, mostly live in working or middle class suburban areas, our lives are currently not directly impacted by climate change. So it is our responsibility to start making the changes that need to be made. I think firstly, many of us still need to wake up to the severity of this crisis. If you are not severely stressed out about climate change, if you don't think about it pretty often, if it's not something that concerns you deeply, then we probably haven't realized how bad climate change is just yet. So researching, education, taking it upon yourself to go online and learn more about this issue is a massive part of it. And then once we have that knowledge, then we can truly start to act as we need to. We have the ability to vote, we have the ability to boycott, to protest, to use our time, to use our money if we have it, to use our voice. We can get involved in local groups. At the moment, it is easier than ever. There are so many climate change fighting organizations, and right now you can go on their Facebook and find a Zoom link to their weekly meeting, and you can get involved and start making a difference. We're more than consumers. This isn't just about buying keep cups and op shopping. Like I said, there is so much more you can do as a political person that can make far more of a change. If you're living on stolen land like I am, it is so important to acknowledge your country, acknowledge the full history of your land. As a person living on stolen land, I acknowledge that everything that I have has come from a violent colonial history. That's the reality. And that, invasion was preceded by one of the richest, oldest cultures to ever exist, who cared for this land with wisdom and spirituality, so much of which was lost that can never be restored. First Nations people are leading the fight against climate injustice, and they've been fighting for the protection of this land since the beginning of time. It should go without saying, but Black lives more than matter. They are vital. So we need to be turning to First Nations people and their knowledge if we're going to have a chance at taking on this crisis. We can change our banks, we can change our energy providers, we can buy solar panels if we can afford them, we can change our supermarkets, we can change our newspapers and the news reporters that we choose to watch. We can highlight the voices of the people who are talking about climate change, because that is the most important issue at the moment. When I say we need to be thinking about climate change all the time, it's not to say that there's not other things going on in our lives that matter and that are important, good or bad. And it's also not to say that there aren't other humanitarian issues that need to take up our time and our thought and our energy. It's just that the exploitation of land and life and people, climate change is linked to everything. And it is the issue that defines our generation. I am getting really restless. I'm a young person, I'm educated on the matters at hand. How am I supposed to keep staying positive and staying hopeful and going about my life when right now I look at my future and it is not very bright at all? And I keep seeing the people who have the power to make the changes that could be made, let the last few opportunities we have to make those changes slip between their fingers. I have moments where I'm really, really devastated and I just lose all hope for the day. I'm grieving my future. And that is a privilege, because so many people are grieving their todays. But when I say all this and I tell you that it's dire and it's pressing and you need to be freaking out, that's not to say that we need to lose hope. Because although these moments inherently I am an optimist, I do believe that we can solve this crisis and that we can achieve justice. It's just that will take a lot of work. And this hope is going to fade pretty quickly if it's not met by action. And we've seen millions of people out on the street and it's hardly made a dent. So I just don't know what it's going to take anymore to make these changes. and we are running out of time. I know this isn't the most happy, comfortable conversation and talk to listen to, but this is the reality. And I'll say it again. We are running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Siena, for choosing and sharing your story and helping to write the story of our future. I certainly share your anger and restlessness along with many of our viewers right now, I'm sure. How are we still not acting on climate change? This is a very relevant question to consider and a powerful final message to conclude our presentations for today. It has been immensely eye-opening and inspirational listening to all our speakers share their stories across ages, fields, and experiences. I, for one, am certainly moved and motivated to choose and shape my own story. I would like to thank Minso for giving me the opportunity to host this remarkable TEDx event. You and your team have worked so hard behind the scenes, and I am so grateful and proud to have worked with you to run this event despite COVID-19 and lockdowns and the trials and tribulations of 2020 overall. Thank you, Minso. For our final part of today's event, we will be having a Q&A with some of our speakers today. Please join the Zoom link in the description box below to have your burning questions answered. And last but not least, I would like to leave you with one question to consider. After listening to all our speakers, how will you choose and shape your story? I hope you enjoyed MacRob's very first TEDx event, and remember to join the Zoom Q&A to continue the conversation with some of our speakers. Thank you.